And for some reason, the big miracle problem in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? What is the deal with Jonah? That seems so outlandish. Well, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? A lot of people say the resurrection, which is a big one, but no, it's an easy miracle compared to the greatest miracle. Did someone just say it? Yeah, the greatest miracle is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, then every other verse is at least believable. Well, we have good evidence that the first verse is indeed true, that a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator created the universe out of nothing. If Genesis 1:1 is true, every other verse is at least possible. I mean, if there is a God out there to create the universe out of nothing, can he part the Red Sea? Mm-hmm. If he can create the universe out of nothing, can he resurrect Jesus from the dead? Mm-hmm. If he can create the universe out of nothing, can he keep Jonah alive in a fish for 3 days or kill him and resurrect him later? Of course, it's easy for a God to create the universe out of nothing. Now, some of you are going, wait, you just said something I don't think's right. You just said that God can do whatever he wants. It's not logically impossible. I thought God could even do logically impossible things. No, there are some things even God can't do. Like what? Like he can't create a square circle. Right? Doesn't exist. It's a contradiction. He can't create a married bachelor. Doesn't exist. Can't create a one-ended stick. Doesn't exist. Can't create an honest politician. There are some things that are just too hard for God. Is there any politicians in here tonight? Anyway. So in fact, there are some things you can do that God can't do. Like what? You can change. God can't change. If he changes, he's going to move from perfection to imperfection. He's the very standard of measurement. If he changes, he's not the standard. God can't lie. God can't go out of existence. In fact, if he could do those things, he'd be weaker. So you can actually do some things that God can't do. Now, the interesting thing, if you look into the New Testament documents, and let's just assume for a second they're true for a minute, you know, Jesus said that his life was compared to both Jonah and Noah. Do you think that Jesus thought Noah and Jonah were historical or hysterical? He thought they were historical. In fact, if God exists, these miracles are easy. And as C.S. Lewis pointed out, if we admit God, must we admit miracles? Indeed, you have no security against it. That is the bargain. If God exists, miracles are possible. If the first verse is true, other verses are at least possible. I'm not saying they're true at this point. I'm just saying they're possible. You say, wait a minute, what about David Hume? How many people here have heard of David Hume? Can I see your hands, please? David Hume. Okay, intelligent audience. Most of the time, people, it's like 20%. You guys are like 60% have heard of David Hume. David Hume was a skeptic, probably the only true atheist of the Enlightenment. He died in 1776. And he came up with an argument against belief in miracles that is still being used in universities to this day to show you that you ought not believe in miracles. We're going to go through the argument very quickly. Here's the argument. Hume says that natural law is by definition a description of a regular occurrence. If you start dropping things, you start dropping everything goes to the floor, and everything seems to be going down. You make these inductive observations enough, you come up with a general principle known as gravity. And it's a natural law. It just keeps happening over and over again. That seems like a sound conclusion that Hume, or sound premise that Hume is coming up with here. Secondly, he says a miracle is by definition a description of a rare occurrence. In fact, in order for miracles to get our attention, they have to be rare. If miracles occurred all the time, if people rose from the dead all the time, then Jesus' miracle would be no big deal. It wouldn't get our attention. Miracles, by definition, have to happen very infrequently to get our attention. If they happen more often, we might think there's some sort of natural phenomenon going on here. So miracles have to be rare to be effective. That's a good premise, it seems, too. Hume goes on to say the evidence for the regular is always greater than that for the rare. Hey, we see that when we watch a football game, right? We see a play from all different angles, many times as we want, slow speed, fast speed. We see it regularly over and over again. The ref sees it from one angle at full speed once. He has to make the call. We have better evidence because we see it regularly. He sees it rarely, once, full speed, has to make the call anyway. Number 4, he says a wise man always bases his belief on the greater evidence. Well, that seems axiomatic, right? You're not going to base your belief on the lesser evidence. So the conclusion for Hume is this. Therefore, a wise man should never believe in miracles. Now, unless there's something wrong with one of those four premises, then Hume's conclusion follows, and if you're a Christian or any other kind of believer, you ought not believe in miracles. There, however, is a problem with one of these premises. Does anyone know which premise is wrong? 4. No, 4 seems good. You want to base your belief on the greater evidence? No? 1. 5 is the conclusion. You can't challenge that unless you... What? 3! Somebody said 3! Actually, it is 3. 3 is a problem. Why? Why is 3 the problem? Because the evidence for regular events is not always greater than that for the rare. In fact, sometimes rare events have good evidence behind them, and you ought to believe them. In fact, in order to show you this, I'm going to use evidence from Hume's own worldview. In other words, if Hume were here today, he would believe these things as an atheist. Yet they're rare events. They don't happen over and over again. For example, the Big Bang is not based on regular events. You can't go in the laboratory and recreate the Big Bang. You can't say, let's go back and do it all over again. You can only look at forensic evidence and come to a conclusion and try and figure out what happened. It happened only once. It's not the Big Bang, 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 bang theory, okay? By the way, you may have heard that the CERN device out there in Switzerland that they're cranking up to find the Higgs boson and all that, they're worried that if they crank that thing up too high, that it could create a black hole and it will suck us right out of existence. Let me just go on record right now that if that's what's going to happen, I'm against it. Also, the origin of life on Earth does not occur regularly. The spontaneous generation has never occurred, but we all believe in spontaneous, or I should say we all believe on the origin of life. It happened somewhere on Earth. Whether it happened by intelligence or natural causes, that's the question. But everyone in here believes it happened. Why? Because we're here. Yet, you can't go in the laboratory and do it over and over again. In fact, Pasteur's beaker is still sterile. If you're in a laboratory somewhere and you sterilize the beaker and the next day there's life in it, your biology professor is not going to say, oh, great, spontaneous generation. He's going to say, you didn't sterilize the beaker right. Yet, we all believe it happened. Also, macroevolution cannot be repeated. If it happened at all, it happened only once. In fact, Richard Linsky from Michigan State University for the past 30 years has been working on E. coli bacteria. And he's been intelligently manipulating E. coli bacteria to see the limits of evolution. And since E. coli bacteria have a very short lifespan, the equivalent of working on 30 years of E. coli bacteria would be equivalent to working on 1 million years of human evolution. Do you know what he has after 30 years? E. coli bacteria. He's been able to maneuver the E. coli bacteria to do certain things it didn't do before, but it's still E. coli bacteria. We can't observe macroevolution, but if Hume were here, he'd believe it. In fact, the entire history of the Earth cannot be repeated. Tomorrow, you're going to have good evidence that this event tonight actually occurred. While you were here, you witnessed it. But you can't go back and repeat it. It happened only once. In fact, that's all history happens only once. Yet we have good evidence to believe in history. So Hume's premise proves too much. This argument fails. Of course, the problem is people still use this argument. But it doesn't work. It failed. In fact, if you notice, Hume's argument is not really an argument against the possibility of miracles. You know what it's an argument against? It's an argument against the believability of miracles. Well, there's something wrong with an argument that says you ought not believe something that really happened. Now you say, why don't more scientists believe in miracles? No way I can speak for all of them, but I'll mention a couple of them here. This man, Richard Lewontin, who teaches at Harvard. He's an atheist, Darwinist, Marxist. He had a very honest admission in 1997 in the New York Review of Books when he said and revealed why he and many of his colleagues, atheistic colleagues, don't believe in miracles. He said this: it's not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept the material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our prior adherence to material causes, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Why can't you allow a divine foot in the door? There's a lot of reasons for that. Some of them are emotional. They're not intellectual. Like, if God gets involved, we're no longer seen as the new priests. who dispense truth to the public. If God gets involved, we may not get the grant money we're looking for. If God gets involved, then we have to say that there's maybe a moral lawgiver out there, and we don't want to bow our knees to a creator. In fact, Thomas Nagel, who just wrote a new book called Mind and Cosmos, I'm going through it right now. In fact, I think I have it right here. It's a very interesting little read. Yeah, here it is. Thomas Nagel is an atheist who teaches at NYU. He just wrote this book about a year ago, in which he basically says that the neo-Darwinist, in fact, let me just read the subtitle. He says, why the materialist neo-Darwinian conception of nature is almost certainly false. Why does he say that? Because there are many aspects of reality that can't be explained by materialism. Like what? Like reason. The very fact that we're reasoning right now with one another. Reason, you can't explain that by molecules. You're not just molecules in motion. Values, moral values can't be explained by materials. Consciousness can't be explained by materials. There's an immaterial reality out there. Now, Nagel does not want to say theism is true. In fact, he says here, I don't want to say it's true. I'm looking for a third alternative. He says materialism is false, but I don't want to go to theism. You know why he doesn't want to go to theism? He admits it. He says it's not just that I don't believe in God. He said, I don't want there to be a God. I don't want there to be a God out there. He said, I have a cosmic authority problem. What's the cosmic authority problem? He doesn't want to bow his knee to the Creator. And he said, I have that. I think Richard Dawkins has that. He said that of Christopher Hitchens before he died. Now, can you say this about all atheists? Of course not. But he's just being honest. He's saying, I don't want there to be a God. I want to do my own thing. Well, God gives you that freedom. That's why we do have free will. Now, we got to move into the ultimate question. Is the New Testament true? Does truth exist? Yes. I think it's self-defeating to say it doesn't. Does God exist? I think there's good evidence that this theistic God exists. Are miracles possible? If God exists, miracles are possible. If the first verse is true, other verses are at least possible. Now we have to look into the New Testament documents, and there are two questions we have to answer to do so. The first question is, do we have an accurate copy of the original New Testament documents? And the second question is, do the original New Testament documents tell the truth? You have one of the top scholars in Dallas here, teaches at Dallas Theological Seminary. His name is Daniel Wallace, and he's written several books on this. And the answer to question number one is yes. And you can look at any of Wallace's work to point this out. You say, what about Bart Ehrman? How many have heard of Bart Ehrman? A few of us. Bart Ehrman tries to say the answer to number one is no. You know the problem, however, with Ehrman's own thesis? He doesn't even agree with himself. Why? In 2005, he wrote a book called Misquoting Jesus, in which he tried to say the answer to question number one is no, against virtually all scholarship. But that same year, Ehrman co-wrote a book with his own mentor, the greatest scholar of the last century on manuscripts. His name was Bruce Metzger. He taught at Princeton University. Ehrman and Metzger came together to update Metzger's classic work on the topic. And in that book, which is written the same year as Misquoting Jesus, Ehrman says the answer to question number one is yes. You say, how can this be? There's no new data. It's written the same year. Why does he say no in one book and yes in another book? I'm speculating now, but here's all I can say. I'm just saying. When you write a book to the general public generally doesn't know any better. And when you write a book that says the Bible might be false, that gets you on the Colbert Report. That gets you on Jon Stewart's show. That gets you a favorable review in the New York Times. That gets you on NPR with Diane Reeves. That gets you all the media attention, and you sell a lot of books. But when you write a book to the academic world that is demonstrably false, you're going to lose all credibility with them. And how many copies is this going to sell? Last time I saw Bart Ehrman, he was driving a very expensive Mercedes. I'm just saying, I don't know if this is true, I'm speculating. But I can't see any other reason that somebody would do this the very same year. Daniel Wallace says that Ehrman is basically out to lunch, and he can prove it. So I'm not going to spend any more time